China has just abolished the letter N from the internet. And I'm not making this up. Nobody is quite sure why. At least not yet, but it's all part of a big crackdown as President Xi prepares to make himself president for life in a return to, in a turn, I guess, to Maoism in China. I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is your right angle on China's crackdown, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. And, gents, I came across this story this morning. You're not going to believe this. Search terms have been blocked now on Sino Weibo, their homegrown search engine, and microblogging site. It is kind of like Twitter. The banned words include disagree, personality cult, lifelong, immortality, emigrate, and shameless. And the story said it was not immediately obvious why the ostensibly harmless letter N has been banned, but some speculated it may either be being used or interpreted as a sign of dissent. Scott, you know, I'm a defense hawk. I believe in spending a lot of money on a lot of cool weapons and a lot of awesome training for our men and women in uniform. But how afraid do we really need to be, despite China's huge economy and their growing military? How afraid do we really need to be of a country that's afraid of the letter N appearing on the internet?
See, I'm glad you asked me that question, because my immediate thought was, how will this affect Sino-America relations? I think, and maybe it was because you know how Sesame Street has been brought to you by the letter N and the number 3. Maybe N just wasn't paying up. Maybe they weren't paying their bills. They were supposed to be sponsoring things and they just didn't pay. So that's it. No more letter N. I don't know how a country that we call China or China is going to get by without one of the few consonants that they have. This is, just the other day I was listening to National Public Radio, which we call Ashel Public Radio, and they were talking about how great things were going in China and how the growth rate is up, and and Xi Jinping is really committed now to to reasonable growth instead of just crazy capitalist freakish growth, and that he's really committed to green energy and all of this kind of stuff. And I'm like, what am I listening to? This sounded like it was being piped right from the Forbidden City direct to my ears, and I think that we, once again, are being led to believe. Remember how we were all terrified of the Soviet Union, and then after the fact, we heard that the place was held together with baling wire and duct tape and stuff like that.
Japan's going to buy everything, and there won't be any American buildings left after Japan buys everything and all the rest.
And every time we hear somebody sing the praises of a totalitarian state, we find out that behind the curtain, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. It's that Wizard of Oz scenario where it's literally collapsing under the weight of its own immorality.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories coming out of China in the last few years is, I think starting in about 2014 or so, China, the central bank, spent over $1 trillion. Those are dollars that they had to get from us. Spent over $1 trillion propping up the value of their currency, because they were going to otherwise have a balance of payments crisis, because all the smart money that's in China is trying to get out of China. It's one of the reasons why real estate has become so expensive in Vancouver, because that's a popular place for the smart Chinese to park their money and get it the hell out of China. And Bill, just this morning, a Wall Street Journal story popped up in my notifications while we were getting ready to tape that says a new estimate says that as big as China's defense budget is, their national budget for national level policing, we're talking about the police state stuff here, all the security cameras, the AI facial recognition, and the bullets for the machine guns and all the rest, is now 20% bigger than China's defense budget. What does that tell you about the state of things in Beijing and around the countryside?
Well, it tells you they know who their enemies are, right?
Everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's their own
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Can you read that list of banned terms again?
Yeah, here we go. It's disagree, personality cult, lifelong, immortality, emigrate, and shameless.
Well, I disagree
N.
with the shameless, lifelong immortality cult and urge everyone to emigrate as quickly as possible because I completely disagree. You're right about the entire pretext of your question is what are they so afraid of? And they're afraid of individuality. My wife, who just got her resident alien card the legal way just a couple days ago, comes from Russia. Thank you. Which is an extremely homogenous country. We were out just last night for dinner, and she said the faces here are so interesting. There's so many different interesting faces here, and I had said earlier to her, and I really do believe this. People point out that there are more engineers in China than there are Americans in America. It's something like that, right? They're so huge, and there's so much education. We're like, oh my God. Invention and the information age is where the economy is now, not the ability to manufacture things cheaply. China is now losing manufacturing jobs to places that can do it even more inexpensively, like Vietnam and the rest, so on. So the future of the economy, the future of prosperity depends on ideas. It's an idea-based society, an information-based society. The Chinese are building what may be the fastest computer in the world, and that's an engineering fact. And I'm not trying to take away from certainly not trying to take away from their engineering or their scientific skills. But what I am trying to say is this: in a nation where everybody looks the same, we cannot understand as Americans the downward selection on individuality that exists in a place like China. Just the constant corralling of people away from individualism to this kind of faceless blob. In Russia, it was the same way. Even from the time of the czars, if you had a nice carpet or something, the only possible reason you could have that is because you wanted to make everybody else feel bad, that kind of thing. So what I'm trying to say is this: all of the innovative ideas that have powered the 21st century economy, pretty much every one of them comes from America, and I suspect they continue to be coming from America, because it's not about how many scientists we turn out or engineers. It's about the individual idea that somebody can come up with something like an app and then actually go out and bring it to market. And not only can they not bring it to market in China as an individual, I contend that uniformity of culture limits their imagination in ways that we don't really understand.
Steve, it just occurred to me when Bill was talking about that. It's like I met a guy from China at a dinner at a church a couple of years ago, and he's an engineer. And he was going to school at Lehigh University for his advanced degree, for his master's degree. And I said, there are a lot of engineering schools in China, aren't there? And he said, yes, there are. And I said, well, why are you coming to Lehigh University in the United States? And he looked at me almost with pity, like, how could you possibly ask a question like that? And I realized when we praise China as this great innovative country, that we talk about gunpowder. And when we praise Islam, we say, well, math arose from Islam. Like the achievements of these great societies happened hundreds upon hundreds of years ago.
Thousands of years ago.
When you're talking about the United States, it's like, hey, did you see what my phone? We had the Chinese built it, but it was all invented here.
I just want to add one quick little story, which is told by my friend Bert Rutan, who went to the Soviet Union, another one of these cases of this uniform, top-down kind of thing. And he talked with one of his equivalents. The man doesn't have any peers, but he has equivalents as an aircraft designer in the Soviet Union. It was end days of the Soviet Union. And Bert and he got to know each other and be friends and stuff. They were talking overnight one dinner, and they had some vodka and so on. And Bert said to the guy, so what's your dream? What is it? What's your dream? What do you want to do? And he went back and forth, the Russian guy with the translator, and they just went at it for 30, 40 seconds. And they said, he doesn't understand the question. Are you asking what did he dream about last night? Did he have any dreams last night? No, what is it? What's your dream? What do you want to do? What do you want to be? Where do you want to go? He just simply couldn't conceive of the idea.
It didn't translate. literally.
It didn't exist. Yeah, that's right. It didn't translate, didn't exist. So we take a lot of things for granted here, but I think that individuality, and especially that rebelliousness, which the left is trying to stamp out, the whole purpose of political correctness is to make sure there's no individuals and no rebelliousness. F those losers, by the way. Anyway, yeah, so much for that.
All right. Yeah, you're right. Currently, at this moment, China's kind of kicking our butts at supercomputers, as Bill just mentioned, high-powered lasers right now, too, and maybe even hypersonic weapons. But I bet you it's going to be an American, or at least a Westerner, who figures out the first quantum laser-powered hypersonic weapon, because that's where the innovation is. It's almost entirely in the West, the real innovation, really cool stuff.
And we're going to use it in our backyard.
I bet we got one already.
We just might.
I bet we do.
The absurdity of China's politics is really what's going to doom them. You know, there was an old Steve Martin bit on one of his albums that I used to listen to when I was a kid. What the volume's super low because I was not supposed to be listening to Steve Martin at the age of 9 or 10. And he was saying that if you're going to commit a serious crime, you always have to put one crazy thing in your demands so you can get off on an insanity plea if you get arrested. So you picture the bank robber, holed up with his hostages and the bank's surrounded by police, and you get on the phone with the police and you say, I demand $1 million in small bills, a plane to Cuba, and the letter E stricken from the English language. And here we are. China has stricken the letter N from the internet. It's these are Heinlein's crazy years, man. We just live in them, and that's your right angle on China and, well, the state of craziness all over the world. Brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. If you like what you see, we'd love to have you on board. Click on BillWhittle.com, become a member. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.